The sooner you leave, the sooner this company can move forward.
Then I'll let you find out for yourself what really makes this place run.
At exactly 9:40, the glass wall behind me reflected a room full of people who clearly wished they were anywhere else. Papers froze mid-air, screens dimmed, and 17 executives stared at me with the same uneasy curiosity you'd give a man who didn't realize he was standing on a trapdoor. Landon Pierce, in his too-tight suit and too proud smile, tapped his pen once against the table like a judge calling the room to attention. Then he delivered the line he had clearly rehearsed. "You're a cassette tape man in a streaming world. Travis, we need people who run, not people who reminisce." The words landed harder than the firing itself. Shock hit me in a clean, sharp wave, fast, surgical. For a moment, it felt like the entire room inhaled at once and forgot how to exhale. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the kind of betrayal that sinks deeper than anger ever could. Wait a minute. I want to say that this is not a channel for casual viewers. If you are someone who thinks deeper than the crowd, please subscribe. It's completely free. Trust me, you won't miss out on the interesting stories ahead. And now, you know what I'm going to do? I looked down at my hand, still holding the old fountain pen my late wife had given me 15 years ago. The cap was warm from my grip. I tightened my fingers around it, not because I needed strength, but because it reminded me there was a time in my life when loyalty meant something. Across the table, Emily Park lowered her gaze to her notebook, pretending to write. 7 years I'd mentored her, walked her through tangled system failures and midnight launch crises. Now she couldn't even look at me. The injury wasn't loud, it was quiet, precise, personal. Landon slid a white envelope toward me as if passing a restaurant bill. "Your severance is inside. HR will escort you out by noon." I didn't sit, I didn't touch it, I only nodded slowly, letting the coldness settle in my bones, because behind my silence, something else had already stirred. The moment Landon dissolved my role. Phoenix. The system I architected and protected for 2 decades had quietly initiated its contingency trigger, a countdown no one else in that room even knew existed. I placed my badge on the table, turned without a word, and walked out. If anyone noticed the faint smile forming, they mistook it for shock. It wasn't. It was certainty. The walk from the conference room to the elevator felt longer than the past 22 years I'd given this company. The door closed behind me with a soft metallic click. And in the sudden quiet, the weight of what had just happened pressed hard against my ribs. Pain came first, sharp, personal, unmistakable, not the pain of losing a job, but the pain of realizing how easily a lifetime of work could be dismissed by a man who barely knew my name yesterday. As the elevator hummed downward, I let the silence settle, forcing myself to breathe through the sting. By the time I stepped into the lobby, the shock had thinned into something slower and heavier. I found myself drifting back to the early years when Metatronics was a failing medical hardware startup clinging to life with frayed wires, debt, and stubborn hope. I remembered the 18-hour days, the long nights I spent rewriting firmware while my wife lay in a hospital bed recovering from her surgery. I'd run between the office and her room, carrying my laptop, balancing fear and duty like twin weights in each hand. I kept going because Metatronics needed me, because she believed in me, because building something that saved lives mattered. There were nights when the rain hit the rooftop so hard, it sounded like the sky was collapsing. I'd sit alone in the dim server room, hunched over a faulty diagnostic line, eating a cold takeout meal at 2 a.m. No applause, no audience, just me, a blinking terminal, and the stubborn conviction that if I could fix one more process, one more kernel thread, the company might survive long enough to see daylight. And it did. Metatronics grew. Deals came in. Our devices entered operating rooms across the country. And somewhere in that growth, I became invisible, part of the wiring, unnoticed unless something broke. That realization no longer hurt. It clarified. Because Metatronics never truly owned the backbone they depended on. Phoenix, the orchestration system that synchronized diagnostics, quality control, regulatory tracking, and manufacturing tolerances, had never been part of their property. I had built it off-site, through a private LLC, after watching leadership cycles replace gratitude with forgetfulness. They wanted the results, not the architect, so I made sure the architect kept the keys. Phoenix lived on infrastructure they never saw, stitched into the company's workflow through mirrored gateways and leased pathways, legal, clean, quiet, mine, standing outside in the cold air. I felt something shift, not anger, not fear, but a cold, steady purpose. They had erased my title, but they would soon remember the architect. Don't speak up unless you've seen enough to suspect otherwise. I should have known things were changing the moment I walked into the third-floor staging room and found a stranger digging through directories he clearly didn't understand. Ryder Moss, 27, sharp haircut, perfect teeth, the kind of confidence only youth and a lack of consequences can produce, looked up at me like I'd wandered in to deliver someone's dry cleaning. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing with polite confusion, the way you might study an outdated appliance left in the wrong aisle. "Hey," he said, tapping his tablet. "You're Travis, right, the legacy guy?" I raised an eyebrow. "Something like that." He grinned with the enthusiasm of someone who didn't realize he was insulting me. "Man, your system is old. I thought I was looking at a museum exhibit. Seriously, half these structures look prehistoric." There it was, the casual dismissal, the kind that doesn't even realize it's a knife until it's already twisting. I'd faced boardrooms full of pressure, surgeons demanding solutions mid-operation, investors breathing down my neck, but nothing quite matched the quiet sting of being looked at like an artifact by someone who still needed GPS to find the supply closet. I held back the sigh. "Be careful with those directories," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Some of them tie into older processes." Ryder waved me off. "They're junk. No way these things are still connected to anything meaningful." He turned the tablet toward me. "See this cluster, totally unused. I'm archiving it." My stomach tightened, not from panic, but from amusement. He had no idea. The folder he was so eager to delete wasn't part of Phoenix's real core. It was a decoy shell, intentionally placed years ago to mislead anyone poking too deeply without proper authorization. I opened my mouth to warn him again, but Ryder was already tapping the confirm button with the confidence of a man disarming a toy rather than a bomb. "Boom," he said proudly, cleaning out the cobwebs. "Sure," I replied lightly. "Just watch for structural fallout." He laughed, thinking I was making a joke. What he didn't know, what no one in Landon Pierce's shiny new tech brigade knew, was that Phoenix had been built for moments exactly like this. As soon as Ryder triggered the deletion, Phoenix silently intercepted the command. On his screen, everything appeared successful. Directory removed, system clean, a job well done, in reality. Phoenix cloned the entire structure into a shadow partition, re-encrypted it, masked the original behind a false metadata layer, and logged every one of Ryder's actions with time-stamped precision. Not a single file was lost, not a single thread broken. And Ryder would never know how close he'd come to unraveling something far bigger than his job description. As I turned to leave the room, he called after me. "See? Travis, we're modernizing." I fought the urge to smile. "Right," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I'm sure the system appreciates your enthusiasm." His confidence was loud. Phoenix's correction was silent, and I preferred the silence. Don't judge too quickly. Because here comes the biggest twist. I knew the moment I stepped into the demo hall that something was off. The lights were brighter than usual, stage bright, interrogation-y bright, and every chair on the floor was neatly lined up as if the company were hosting a TED Talk instead of a system review. I stood near the back, anonymous without my old nameplate, watching people settle in. A strange ache pressed into my ribs, the kind that resembles grief more than discomfort. Emily Park took the stage first. 7 years ago, she could barely configure a sandbox environment without asking me twice. Now she stood there. Microphone clipped to her blouse, posture straight, smile polished to corporate perfection. And yet, when she began speaking, I noticed it immediately. She misused a critical term in the new routing model, flipping a scheduler with an allocator, a rookie mistake. Instinct pushed my hand up. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet, subtle gesture meant to prevent an error from spreading through the entire presentation. But the moment Emily's eyes met mine, everything in the room shifted. She paused, tightened her jaw, then spoke into the mic with a sweetness so rehearsed it could cut glass. "Mr. Cole, your time has passed. Let the younger team handle things." A soft ripple moved through the crowd, not gasps, not whispers, just an uncomfortable shuffling, a tightening of shoulders, a sudden fascination with floor tiles. No one looked at me. It was as if acknowledging my presence might turn them to stone. I'd seen this expression before, the one people wear around a forgotten machine left in a hallway. a relic, a technical corpse. The sting hit fast, sharper than I expected. I felt heat behind my eyes, not from humiliation alone, but from the blinding stage light aimed directly at me, illuminating every line on my face. Every year I'd spent building a system they no longer wanted to remember. For a split second, that light brought me back to the night I stood in the hospital hallway outside my wife's room, the same harsh fluorescence, the same loneliness, the same sense of being left behind. I lowered my hand slowly, forcing my breathing to steady. "Of course," I murmured. My voice didn't shake. "That was something." Emily continued her demo as if I'd never spoken. Ryder Moss clicked through slides with exaggerated confidence, tossing around buzzwords he didn't understand. The audience nodded along, pretending the performance was impressive, pretending innovation was happening, pretending I wasn't still standing right there. But the room wasn't as controlled as they thought. Near the side aisle, a young intern barely 23, still nervous around printers, held his phone discreetly angled toward the stage. He'd been recording the entire presentation, including Emily's dismissal and the collective avoidance that followed. I caught his eye. He winced, lowered the phone, and slipped out. By the afternoon, the clip had already begun spreading across Slack channels quietly, privately, irresistibly. They wanted to erase me. Instead, they documented themselves. "This paragraph explains everything you are about to hear." The moment I stepped through my apartment door, the silence felt different, cleaner, steadier, almost like the world outside had finally stopped spinning. I dropped my keys on the counter, reached for the switch, and the old kitchen light flickered before settling into its familiar warm glow. That bulb had been replaced a dozen times, but the sound it made, the soft hum. The tiny delay hadn't changed in 2 decades. Unlike Metatronics, it didn't pretend to be something newer to justify its existence. I walked to the corner, where the same dented coffee maker I'd bought 20 years ago sat waiting. It groaned when I filled the reservoir, clicked when I pressed the button, and released a slow, uneven drip that smelled like routine and survival in a world obsessed with replacing everything. This machine refused to quit. Maybe that's why I'd kept it, a reminder that durability didn't need applause. With the mug warming my hands, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The blank resignation email I'd drafted earlier that day waited like an invitation to surrender. I read the first line twice. It sounded civil, professional, appropriate, everything I'd been trained to be. My finger hovered over the trackpad, ready to send it into the void and walk away from the mess once and for all, but something in me resisted. A quiet pull, a steadying pulse. No, that wasn't the end of my story. Not yet. I closed the draft and opened the Phoenix admin console instead. The familiar interface bloomed across the screen, lines of data flowing like a river I'd charted every bend of, even now. Phoenix operated without a single hiccup, stabilizing the company that had just thrown me away. I watched the log scroll, letting the cold clarity settle in. That's when the first alert appeared. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Origin internal, credentials spoofed, user E-Park. My breath didn't hitch. My pulse didn't spike. I simply leaned forward, watching the log unfold with the same calm a surgeon might use while evaluating an X-ray. Emily had attempted to access Phoenix's core through a masked credential string, sloppy, uninformed, and dangerously ambitious. She'd routed the attempt through a fake legacy account, layering it with recycled metadata from an outdated admin profile. Anyone else might have fallen for it. Phoenix didn't. The system captured every byte she touched, traced the spoof chain, and isolated the attempt in a secure shadow log. Then, exactly as I designed it to. Phoenix blocked the request so gently that Emily probably thought the system had timed out. A chill washed through me, not fear, not anger, but something colder, cleaner, control. I took a slow sip of coffee. The bitterness grounded me. They thought they had moved on without me. They thought I'd fade quietly, like an obsolete component. But tonight, watching Phoenix defend itself exactly as I had taught it, something inside me stirred a rising, steady force, not rage, not revenge, a return. The email from HR arrived with the kind of hollow politeness that feels colder than outright hostility. Please schedule a time to collect your personal belongings. A security escort will be provided. That was all. No thank you. No acknowledgement of 22 years. No human warmth, just a time-stamped instruction to disappear quietly. I stared at the message for a long moment before finally clicking the earliest slot available. If they wanted me gone, I'd give them their clean exit. When I arrived at Metatronics later that afternoon, the lobby lights felt brighter than usual, sterile, performative, as if the building itself were pretending nothing had happened. A young security officer approached me, reading my name from his tablet before he bothered to look at my face. "Mr. E. Cole, I'll walk you up." His tone was formal, crisp, the kind used for strangers or troublemakers, not for the man who had kept the company's heartbeat steady for 2 decades. We rode the elevator in silence. He stood stiffly beside me, hands clasped, as if afraid I might bolt or shatter. I didn't say a word. Loneliness pressed in around me, not dramatic, not loud, just a familiar, heavy presence settling across my shoulders. By the time the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I felt like a ghost stepping into a world that had already forgotten me. My old desk looked smaller than I remembered. Most of my things were already packed into a cardboard box, arranged with mechanical efficiency. The drawers were empty except for one. When I pulled the bottom drawer, it caught halfway. I tugged harder, and something thin slid free from behind the metal track, a yellowed folder. Inside, I found the original Phoenix blueprint, my blueprint. The ink had faded just enough to show its age, but my handwriting was unmistakable. The architecture, the node routing, the early redundancy sketches, and in the bottom corner, written in soft blue pen, said a message I hadn't seen in years. "Proud of you, Linda." My chest tightened. The room, the box, the escort, all of it blurred at the edges. I traced her handwriting with my thumb, quietly steadying my breath. This wasn't just evidence of authorship. As I flipped through the pages, I found something else, a module diagram I had drafted during the most difficult days of her illness. A fail-safe design, untouched, undocumented, unseen by anyone at Metatronics. I had forgotten it existed. They had tried to erase me, but they had packed away proof of everything they didn't understand. I closed the folder carefully and placed it in the box. "Ready?" the guard asked softly, almost gently now. "Yes," I said, feeling a clarity settle through me. "Let's go." I walked out of the building with nothing more than a cardboard box and a blueprint that changed everything. There is a small change, but if you don't want to dig deeper, you don't need to pay attention by the next morning. The world felt oddly still, one of those winter mornings when the snow softens every sound outside, and even the air seems to pause. I sat on the small bench beside my apartment window, watching flakes drift down in slow spirals while my old coffee maker clicked through its familiar routine behind me. The cup warmed my hands, the aroma settling into the room like an old friend. Nothing in my apartment had changed, but Metatronics was beginning to feel the first tremors. Phoenix had started its work. At 8:15. The first alert reached my private console, a delay in the cardiac simulator calibration pipeline. Normally, that system ran like clockwork, 96 seconds from start to finish. That morning, it froze at 62. The technicians in the lab would blame the hardware, then the firmware, then the network. They'd restart a few terminals. They'd reboot some diagnostics. None of it would help, because Phoenix wasn't failing. It was breathing differently. By 9, the QC servers reported a backlog of pending validations, small at first, just a handful of test results stalled in the queue. Then dozens, then hundreds, a harmless desync, the kind no one would trace to anything deliberate. A spark of irritation would ripple through the supervisors, but irritation wasn't panic. Not yet. I took another slow sip of coffee, letting the steam rise across my face. If anyone had seen me, they would have thought I was watching a morning weather report, not the steady unraveling of the system I'd designed to protect and expose when necessary. At 9:40, a new log appeared. Unauthorized diagnostics retry user L. Tran. Logan. Tran, one of the few young engineers I'd actually liked. Curious, quick on his feet, a bit too blunt for corporate politics. He'd stumbled onto something he shouldn't have, the shadow misalignment Phoenix had created in the QC relay. And instead of panicking, he dug deeper, running a manual traceback through the analytics buffer. Impressive, risky, predictable. His scan caught a fragment Phoenix had intentionally left visible, a root-level identifier embedded inside an archived relay. Phoenix, root sys owner, T. Cole, my name, clear as daylight. I could imagine the look on his face, confusion first, then realization. Then the dawning understanding that he had found something older and deeper than anything in the company's codebase. He tried to open it. Of course, anyone with enough curiosity would. But Phoenix had its own rules. When Logan attempted access, Phoenix responded with a hard rejection: no crashes, no alarms, no alerts to leadership, just a simple lockout. His terminal would have frozen for a heartbeat, then resumed as if nothing had happened, a ghost door slamming shut. I leaned back against the wall, watching the snow thicken outside. The city looked peaceful, unaware that a multi-billion-dollar medical manufacturer was beginning to choke on its own arrogance. The world believed Meditronics was running on youth, innovation, and polished presentations. But today reminded them quietly, surgically, that the system still moved to a rhythm I had written, and for the first time in weeks. The cold didn't bother me at all. Meditronics had officially entered the panic phase. I could feel it even from miles away, an anxious pulse running through the system logs. The kind of frantic digital noise a dying structure makes when people start pushing every button they can find. And then, right on time, the real show arrived, a team of cybersecurity specialists flown in from Washington, D.C., the kind of contractors who walked with straight shoulders and spoke like they'd been hired to save a nation, not a crumbling production network. Their arrival triggered a flurry of new access attempts in Phoenix's console. I watched from my apartment, coffee in hand, as the first scan hit the outer shell clean. Textbook. Predictable. 2 minutes later, they launched a second attempt, this one deeper, more aggressive. The confidence radiated through the logs. Every script they deployed practically shouted, "We fix everything." I felt nothing, not concern, not anger, just a cold, steady detachment. They had no idea what they were touching. The third probe was a brute force diagnostic designed to map hidden subdirectories. It bounced off Phoenix's false architecture, grabbed a handful of meaningless metadata, and came back hungry for more. Their lead engineer escalated immediately. Deploying a tunneling script meant to punch through virtual partitions. That was their mistake. On my screen, a single line flashed: "Containment protocol activated." And then, in less than 1 second, Phoenix wiped their credentials. Every alias, every clearance key, every remote access token erased as if they had never existed. The monitoring feed flickered as their screens at headquarters went dark, a synchronized blackout that probably knocked the arrogance right out of the room. But Phoenix wasn't finished. A synthesized voice played through their terminals, clear, calm, unmistakable, unauthorized authority. System integrity preserved. I froze. It wasn't just any automated voice. It was hers, the same soft tone my wife used years ago when she recorded reminders for me during the toughest months of her illness. I had integrated that voice into Phoenix as a way to carry her with me. A private anchor only I understood. Hearing it echo across Meditronics' systems now hit harder than any revenge I could have orchestrated. For a moment, the coldness cracked. Just a moment. Then the stillness returned sharper than before. Back at headquarters, confusion spread like wildfire. The DC specialists scrambled to regain access, but Phoenix shut them out completely. They tried fallback channels, emergency credentials, even vendor-side overrides. Nothing worked. Every attempt ended the same way: another blackout, another message in her voice. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle. They believed they were the rescue team, but Phoenix didn't need rescuing, and I was still the only one left who could speak its language. By Friday morning, Meditronics' tension was so thick it practically leaked through the system logs. Even from my apartment, I could sense it: the frantic ticket escalations, the overlapping error flags, the rapid-fire diagnostics. Hours earlier, one of the major ICU clients filed a furious complaint. Nearly a dozen of their monitoring units had frozen mid-operation. Nothing fatal, thank God, but enough to send every investor over 70 into a full-blown panic. Those were the people who valued consistency more than charisma. And right now, Landon had neither. So when the emergency board meeting began, I opened Phoenix's monitoring feed and listened. I didn't need to be in the room to feel the pressure. The first voice that cut through the call belonged to an older investor, irritated and unfiltered. "Landon, our devices are failing in critical units. Do you understand what critical means?" Another chimed in about delivery delays. Another complained about manufacturing being out of sync, their frustrations stacked like sandbags. Landon cleared his throat, performative. "Defensive. We've identified the issue. He announced, "Phoenix was developed internally years ago. Some of the older architecture is showing strain. My team is working on stabilizing it." There was a pause, long, icy, suspicious. Then came the voice that truly mattered. Elliot Graves, the company's oldest, wealthiest, and least patient investor. "That's not accurate," he said calmly. Every digital heartbeat in the room stopped. Landon stammered. "Elliot, the system was written here at Metatronics, Legacy Division, long before I arrived." "No," Elliot replied, "because 6 years ago, at a partner lunch in Chicago, Travis sat across from me and sketched the early Phoenix architecture on a napkin." My breath caught not from fear, but from something sharper, something freeing. Elliot continued. He explained its modular sequencing, its resilience layers, and why the company would someday rely on it more than any leadership title. Someone in the room whispered. A napkin, but Elliot ignored them. Then came the moment that cracked the boardroom open. Elliot lifted something toward the camera, and I still have it. A photograph appeared in the shared file preview, a crisp shot of a folded napkin covered in my old handwriting, node maps, routing lines, my initials, and in the lower corner, written in gentle blue ink, unmistakable, "Proud of you, Linda." With a date, time, location, the signature of my wife gone now, but permanently tied to the system Metatronics depended on. The boardroom fell silent. Not respectful silence. Damning silence. Landon's voice finally emerged, strained and cracking. This must be a misunderstanding. "Oh, it's perfectly clear," Elliot interrupted. "Phoenix was never yours." I leaned back in my chair, allowing a slow, dry smile to form. All that pressure I'd carried, gone released in one clean exhale. They wanted a scapegoat. What they got was a signed artifact. And, honestly, a napkin had never looked so powerful. The fallout came faster than even I expected. The moment Elliot revealed that napkin, the board fractured like glass under pressure. By the end of the week, 3 major hospital networks pulled their contracts. The ICU device recall hit national headlines, and Metatronics, once obsessed with speed and shine, suddenly found itself unable to produce a single functioning unit. Every system they touched buckled, stalled, or froze, as if Phoenix itself were tired of pretending to obey them. And Landon. He collapsed even quicker than the infrastructure he'd failed to understand. A formal investigation opened into his creative reporting, and investors began distancing themselves with the same speed they once pretended to admire him. The man who mocked me for being outdated was now reduced to a headline no CEO ever wants under review for operational misconduct. Poetic, really. In a quiet, satisfying way. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed with the offer I didn't know I'd been waiting for. A growing Boston startup, a team-building medical diagnostics tech with more integrity than ego, invited me to join as CTO, the founder told me. "We need someone who builds foundations, not someone who needs an audience." For the first time in months, something in my chest loosened. On my first day there, I placed the original Phoenix blueprint beside a framed photo of my wife, Linda, on my new desk. Seeing her handwriting "Proud of you" next to the system I had rebuilt from the ashes felt like closing a circle I'd carried far too long. A week later, I stepped onto the rooftop of the new office. From that height, Metatronics' tower shimmered faintly across the skyline, its lights flickering, failing, and stubbornly trying to pretend nothing had changed. The irony tasted sweet. I let the cold wind hit my face and whispered with a smile that carried years of restraint. They replaced me because they thought I was outdated. But technology never ages, only people's loyalty does. And that was the truth I walked away with. In the end, your value isn't measured by who keeps you, it's measured by what still stands when they lose you. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside, remember, foundations don't crumble just because someone stops recognizing them. If this story resonated with you, let me know where you're watching from. And if you'd like more stories like this, feel free to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe. Sometimes a single story is all it takes to remind someone of their worth.